In a career spanning almost 5 decades, Rock and Roll Hall of Famer Jackson Browne has firmly established himself as one of the greatest songwriters of all time. Across 14 studio albums, Jackson has created some of the most moving and emotive songs in music, and influenced countless bands, artists and activists. To celebrate the February release of his highly anticipated 15th studio album, Downhill from Everywhere, I take on the arduous task of ranking each of his 14 studio albums. But first, a quick disclaimer. As a huge Jackson Browne fan, this is not about going from worst to best, but from good to great. This is purely my own thoughts, rather than a definitive list, so feel free to share your list in the comments below, because there's no wrong answers. So without further ado, I'm Ash Robertson from Man Thoughts, and this is ranking every Jackson Browne album. Number 14, The Naked Ride Home. It was always going to be hard to decide which record sits at the bottom of this list. For me, that honour unfortunately falls to Jackson's 2002 effort, The Naked Ride Home. It's an album which undoubtedly showcases his superb songwriting and recording, as well as his long-standing ability to explore different genres and styles. But with the exception of the title track and its closer, My Stunning Mystery Companion, The Naked Ride Home doesn't offer those enduring favourites or live staples like many of his other efforts. It's also the Jackson Browne album I probably listen to the least. That's not to say it's bad, however, as live performances at the likes of Austin City Limits and on Soundstage showed it's a well-crafted effort. Number 13, World in Motion. In my first Jackson Browne video, many commenters mentioned how they moved away from his music following his 80s trilogy of political albums. 1989's World in Motion was the final album and arguably the most political of the three, but much like those that came before, I would argue that World in Motion is not only ahead of its time, but it's improved with age. Ultimately, tracks like The Word Justice, How Long and My Personal Revenge may have proven a step too far for those used to The Pretender, but whilst they may not be on heavy repeat, you cannot discount the sheer musicality and production of his effort. Plus, the record created its fair share of memorable songs too, from Enough of the Night, Chasing You Into the Light, and Little Steven's show closer, I Am a Patriot. Number 12, Time the Conqueror. Following The Naked Ride Home was Time the Conqueror in 2008. It's a record that clearly demonstrates Jackson's frustrations with the Bush administration, as he takes on topics such as the handling of Hurricane Katrina, the Iraq War, and US foreign policy in South America. Those political themes were then balanced with more reflective and personal songs. Time the Conqueror may sit higher on my list compared to others, as it was the latest studio material out when my Jackson fandom began, so it has lots of sentimental value. While the likes of Just Say Yeah and Off the Wonderland have since become fixtures in my playlists, sleepers such as The Arms of Night and Live New Cabaret will never fail to catch my attention on playthroughs. Number 11, Lawyers in Love. The 1983 release of Lawyers in Love presented a real shift in tone to Jackson's music, as his songs began to follow more political themes. That starts in earnest with the title track, a fantastic opener which is deeply satirical and unlike anything we've heard from Jackson before. There's no way I'm clever enough to explain the messages and nuances behind this really intelligent song, and I can't tell you why I like it, I just know that I do. Glossing over the conflicted Say It Isn't True, the rest of the album captures that live downtown vibe Jackson was aiming for from his makeshift warehouse studio. Tracks like Knock on Any Door, Tender as the Night and For a Rocker gained extensive airplay and are still called out at concerts today. The icing on the cake would have been the addition of Jackson's smash hit Somebody's Baby, an omission he's mentioned regrets about in recent years. Number 10, Looking East. Jackson's 1996 effort Looking East had the unenviable task of trying to follow the success of I'm Alive. Whilst it didn't manage to replicate that same success or critical acclaim, Looking East is still a solid album. It's arguably best remembered for the standout track The Barricades of Heaven, which sees Jackson reminiscing on his younger years growing up in LA. But beyond that, the album offers plenty more, whether it's the title track, which is still a regular in concerts, the upbeat Sun Bridges, or in my opinion the underrated Nino, which is a real hidden gem. Throughout this year of lockdowns and distancing, Alive in the World has become a firm favourite, one of my all-time favourite Jackson Browne songs. All in all, Looking East may be more skippable than other Jackson Browne albums, but it still has its fair share of gems. Number 9. Hold Out. Speaking of unenviable tasks, Hold Out had the hardest job of all as it followed Jackson's incredible 4-album run, stretching from his debut in 1972 through to his live triumph with Runnin' on Empty. In truth, it was that role as the anticipated follow-up to Runnin' on Empty that really led to Hold Out's success. It became Jackson's one and only Billboard #1 record, despite being widely panned by critics. The mix of Jackson going headfirst into the 80s, all while trying to shake off his LA heartthrob image, fell short of the mark for some. For me, I think this is an album that has only got better with age, and is much better appreciated now, 40 years on. I don't know whether it's because I'm a biased fan, or critics are just unnecessarily harsh, but I think it's a good record, especially with tracks like Call It Alone and That Girl Could Sing. I'm even a fan of some of the cheesier tunes like Disco Apocalypse and Boulevard. Yes, it's not perfect and there are some awkward moments, especially parts of the 8-minute finale, but even so, it's definitely an album to revisit in full. Number 8. Standing in the Breach. The launch of Standing in the Breach in 2014, a whole 6 years after his previous studio album, was undoubtedly a "you've still got it" moment. Whilst his contemporaries relied on remasters, covers and digging through the archives, Jackson was still at the top of his game, creating strong new material. The title track itself, written following the Haitian earthquake, is a before the deluge for my generation. It's the same for the likes of Which Side or If I Could Be Anywhere, which in true Jackson Browne fashion are calls to action to face the biggest political and environmental issues of the day. And to top it all off, there's plenty of quintessential Jackson in there too. Whether it's the Byrds reimagining of The Birds of St. Mark's, the reflective Long Way Around, or the moving Walls and Doors. It's no wonder it was named one of the best albums of 2014 by Rolling Stone, finishing ahead of efforts from the likes of Tom Petty, Leonard Cohen and Prince, to name just a few. Number 7. Lives in the Balance. The release of Lives in the Balance in 1986 showed that the political themes of Lawyers in Love were not just a passing phase. If anything, they'd gotten stronger, as expressed in the anthem that opens the album and the masterpiece that is the title song. What makes the record so special is Jackson addresses these subjects without veering off into a rant, or neglecting what brought him to the dance. Incredible songwriting, great musicality, and wonderful production. The effort and quality that went into a vintage Jackson Browne song like In the Shape of a Heart is just as visible in the likes of Soldier of Plenty, Candy, or The Great Lawless Avenues. The album's finale, Black and White, sounded just as good as the opening song of Jackson's 2013 live TV special. Whilst there may be those turned off by the subject matter, I really like this album. I think it's really underrated, and I regularly find myself dropping the needle and just letting the record play. Like I said before, Lives in the Balance is another example of an album that has just got better with age, and I'd even argue that these albums are just as relevant today. Number 6. I'm Alive. For those switched off by Jackson's more political and socially orientated albums, the release of I'm Alive in 1993 came as a triumphant return to form. Jackson once again looked inward and turned to more personal subject matter with great success. The result is a fantastic collection of songs, which easily stand alongside his most celebrated efforts. It was one of the first Jackson Browne albums I ever bought, and it's been in my heavy rotation ever since. That's not just because of the big hits like I'm Alive and Sky Blue and Black, but for the sleepers too, such as Take This Rain, Two of Me, Two of You, and My Problem Is You. Plus you have those off-piece songs that sound great for very different reasons, like the reggae beat of Everywhere I Go and the ethereal sounds of Too Many Angels. The Going Home special does a fantastic job of showcasing the brilliance of I'm Alive and explaining why many critics and fans feel it has much in common with a certain 1974 masterpiece. Number 5. Jackson Browne. Now we're at the business end of this list, this is where it's extremely hard to call. At number 5 we have his 1972 debut, Jackson Browne, not Saturate Before Using. William Ruhlman of AllMusic arguably describes the record best when he says it doesn't sound like a debut. He's absolutely right. Jackson not only sings so eloquently and with such authority, but the album itself is so expertly crafted. Many fans have suggested that this debut sounds as if it was written after a disaster, and I completely agree. You can trace that story arc throughout each song, from Jamaica through to Song for Adam, Rock Me on the Water, even the bombastic hit Doctor My Eyes fits that motif. It's truly incredible that a young artist can come out the gates with such an impactful debut. It truly is a timeless record that's fantastic from start to finish. Not only was it great vindication for David Geffen, starting Asylum Records to give Jackson his elusive record deal, but it served as a great launching pad for an incredible career that's still going strong almost 50 years later. Number 4, The Pretender. Even by the time of his 4th album, The Pretender in 1976, Jackson Browne's success showed no signs of slowing down, with no drop in quality either. Whilst the title track is the best example of this, the album is centred around lost ideals, the disappointment that those bold dreams of youth and aspirations of a better life are so quickly compromised by the daily grind. Such is Jackson's craft, we can all identify in some way as the Pretender, no matter your age. That overriding theme continues throughout the Jon Landau produced album, with one of my all-time favourites, Your Bright Baby Blues, or the beautiful The Only Child. And to be expected from Jackson, you also get a genre shock too, with the stunning mariachi-inspired Linda Paloma. What makes The Pretender and Jackson's effort even more impressive is the fact that during recording, Jackson's then wife Phyllis Major committed suicide. In many ways, the record took on a new meaning after that, as highlighted by the songs Here Come Those Tears Again and the moving Sleep's Dark and Silent Gate. With such incredible material, it's no wonder The Pretender was a commercial breakthrough for Jackson, climbing the Billboard charts and quickly going platinum. Number 3, Running on Empty. Just 1 year later and Jackson is back with his 5th album and his first live album, Running on Empty. Recorded during touring for The Pretender, Running on Empty expertly documents the trials and tribulations of life on the road. But unlike other live albums, this wasn't a greatest hits. Instead, it's new songs and a few covers recorded across the tour, whether it's live on stage, in hotel rooms, backstage, or even on the tour bus. There's just so much to love and admire about Running on Empty. First of all is that fly on the wall style that each song expertly offers, whether it's the burnout of the title track, the groupies in Rosie, or the incredible roadies in the record's legendary closer. Second is the varied recordings, which add such depth to the record. Hearing the roar of the crowd, the isolation of the hotel room, and then the chug of the tour bus. It's that extra dimension that makes Running on Empty one of, if not the best, live album around. And then finally, you have the incredible musicians supporting Jackson, with the legendary Section and his ultra-talented sideband David Lindley playing a huge role in the sound and success of this fantastic record. This was in fact my very first Jackson Browne album, and I haven't stopped playing it since. Number 2, For Everyman. David Crosby famously said, "Don't judge an artist after their first album, as it's 10 plus years of work. It's with the second album where you find out just how good they are." That's certainly the case with Jackson Browne's second record, For Everyman. Even with the success and acclaim of his debut, For Everyman feels like a clear step forward. Not only does his voice sound more mature, but the songs feel fuller, as the sparse arrangements of Jackson Browne are swapped for greater production, all while retaining that intimacy. The imagery is much grander too, whether it's Colours of the Sun or quite possibly my favourite Jackson Browne song, Our Lady of the Well. It's one of my favourite albums to play in full, starting with Jackson's version of Take It Easy, through to the beautiful These Days, and onto the hopeful finale For Everyman. Yes, a track like Redneck Friend, and maybe even Ready or Not, may in some eyes seem out of place, but I would argue they show the breadth of Jackson's artistry, and the musical foundations that would lead him to Late for the Sky, The Pretender, and then Running on Empty. In the case of his sophomore album, it was certainly For Everyman. And number 1, Late for the Sky. Whilst I know fans will debate much of this list, I'm sure many are in agreement with the number 1 pick. 1974's Late for the Sky is quite simply a masterpiece, an album that every household should own and every school should study. What makes it even more impressive is that it was made on a time crunch and on a significantly smaller budget than previous efforts. Yet Jackson delivers some of his strongest, most poignant and most moving material. Songs like Farther On, for a dancer, and the incredible title track that strike a chord directly in your soul. Musically, the record is tremendous. Lyrically, it's unparalleled. Plus, you have the light relief of the road and the sky, and Walking Slow to break up those songs that give you all the feels. Quite simply, nothing I can say can really do justice to how special Late for the Sky is. Whether I play the record, stream it on Spotify, or feel the warmth of A Fountain of Sorrow or Before the Deluge live in concert, nothing can truly come close for me. And that's our list. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and comment down below with how your list would look. Let me know your favourite songs and your Jackson Browne stories. While you're here, don't forget to check out our other Jackson Browne and music videos. Until next time, we'll see you again soon here at Man Thoughts.